Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me. My name is Tess Leyland, and I am the Schools Liaison Officer at Magdalene College, Cambridge, which is one of the constituent colleges that makes up the University of Cambridge. And today I am going to really introduce you to university on the whole. So we're going to start by sort of unpacking some of the questions that come up around university, and then I'm going to focus particularly on Cambridge and some of the quirks within it. So before we start, just the disclaimer that you'll normally get if you've seen any of these recordings before, which is that all of the information I'm going to give you is correct at the time of recording, which is the 10th of March 2021. That being said, if you are watching this recording after that date, just make sure that all the information is still correct, as this is quite a fast moving space. So it's normally best to just check the websites of the institutions or the departments or any of the things I'm going to mention today. Okay, so let's just get started. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start by introducing you to university and then focus on to Cambridge. And we're going to particularly focus on the college system at that point. And then we're going to move on to the application process. And I'm going to particularly run through how you apply and sort of the points where it's a little bit different for Cambridge and other universities. And then finally, we're going to talk about what you might want to be thinking about now when it comes to university and the sort of decisions that you might have to make quite soon, and also what you can be doing now. Okay, so I have no doubt that university will feel like an awfully long way off for a lot of you. However, time does have a habit of sort of catching people out. So if you are thinking that you might want to go to university, there's no harm in getting started earlier, sort of thinking about this. So there are over 50,000 different courses offered across the UK at nearly 400 different providers. So there really is a huge world of choice. I've put a few of these universities on the slide right now, but this is by no means comprehensive. And this is great because if you think you might want to go to university, then you'll certainly find something that really excites you, a course that you really want to pursue and that you'll really thrive at. But the thing is that when you've got this much choice, it can seem a little bit overwhelming at first, which is why I was saying that it is great to start researching as soon as possible, because as soon as you start researching these things, the sooner this all falls into place, and it'll definitely put you in good stead later down the line. I also just want to say as well is that university isn't the only available route, and it's not always the best route for everyone. So if you don't want to go to university, that's completely fine. And, thank you for looking into it a little bit. That's great. If you've looked into it and you think, you know what, this isn't to me, then I really hope you don't feel any sort of pressure to apply to university or, to push yourself any further with it. Because if you don't think that it will suit you and your ambitions, then you might not want to consider it. Okay, so moving on, now let's just sort of think about some of the big questions that come up a lot when people are thinking about university. So let's start with, how is school different from university? So the first way that school is different is that university, is different from school, is that you have more freedom to choose what you study. So you might have already had a taste of this at school. So you may have been able to pick certain GCSEs you wanted to do, and you'll certainly be able to pick your A levels. And this is true at university as well, because when you apply, you are sort of applying to study a particular subject or a combination of subjects. And within that subject, you'll also have the ability to choose certain modules that you want to do. Most courses will offer either a dissertation, which is basically a long essay that you'll do normally in your third year, or a research project that you'll be able to pick. So you really will get the option to specialize into something that you find really interesting and really exciting. Another way that university is slightly different from school is that you'll have more independence in choosing how and when you study. So you'll be able to study in a coffee shop or something that has a little bit more buzz to it, but you'll also have the option to study in like a library where you might be able to hear a pen drop. So it really depends on what you find useful. You'll also be able to choose when you study. As we'll talk about in the next point, you'll probably have less formal contact time. So you'll be able to sort of design your own schedule a little bit. You might be really good at working at night, or you might be like me and be much better at being an early bird. The other thing about university when we're talking about independence is that you'll have more independence to determine, you'll be more responsible for your own learning. You'll have a lot of sort of work to do in your own time, and you'll have to manage your time and to work on independent projects that you might have a little bit more support with at school. The good thing about this is that, again, you'll have more sort of freedom to choose which angles you want to take things and to decide when and what you want to research. So as I mentioned, you're likely to have less formal contact time at university. So unlike at school, for all courses, you're unlikely to be sort of in teaching environments from 9 till 3 or 9 till 4. Some students might have only a couple of hours of sort of contact time a day, and the contact time that you have will actually take quite a different form. So students are taught in a variety of different ways. So the first way students are taught is often lectures, which is normally when one person stands at the front of a lecture hall and presents to sort of a big cohort of students, maybe a couple of hundred, on a particular topic. Students also often attend seminars, which are sort of smaller group teaching sessions, maybe around 10 to 15 people on a particular problem or a particular text. If you are a scientist, then you're also likely to have labs and practicals, which are sort of in specialized buildings with special equipment doing experiments. And you'll also have supervisions too if you are at Oxford or Cambridge, and similar things at other universities. So supervisions at Cambridge or tutorials at are basically small group teaching sessions. They're normally one-on-one or two-on-one with a leading academic. So you can really dive into your subject and ask all the questions you have. These also mean that the learning process at Oxford and Cambridge is incredibly individualized. So again, you'll have sort of further opportunity to tumble down rabbit holes that you want to tumble down, but you'll also be able to ask any questions you have in a much smaller environment instead of having to do it in a lecture hall or to have to follow up separately. Another big difference between school and university is that instead of being taught by teachers, as you are now, you'll be taught by academics. And the difference between an academic and a teacher is that an academic is not just there to teach you. That's one part of their job. But another part of their job is that they are there to research into their chosen field. This is really good and really exciting because it does mean that you will get that insight from people who are often at the very forefront of their subject and doing some really exciting and innovative research. But it does sometimes mean that they are juggling quite a few different things. Okay, so this is just sort of an example of what this all looks like in practice. So this is a first year law timetable for a student at Cambridge. It's sort of meant to be indicative of all the humanities subjects you might be interested in studying, which will include things like history and English, etc. So there's a few lectures in this person's timetable and 2 supervisions, which are those small group teaching sessions I just discussed. You'll notice there's quite a lot of sort of clear time in this timetable. And unfortunately, this wouldn't just be time off. We do expect students to do quite a lot of independent study, as we just mentioned. So this could take the form of writing up lecture notes or maybe doing some revision, depending on the time of year. Or the student might be, writing up an essay or researching an essay for one of their supervisions. In total, we'd expect students to do about 40 hours of work a week, which can sound like quite a lot when you're thinking about it now, but it's actually not that much different from what you're doing at school. And it's really not that different at all from what you'll be doing when you graduate and you enter the workplace. And this is just an example of what this looks like from the sciences point of view. So this is a first year engineering timetable, which is meant to be indicative of sort of all of the sciences. You'll notice it's a little bit busier than the humanities timetable was, and that's because scientists generally have more contact time because they'll have labs or practicals or things like that to sort of take up the time. But there is still quite a bit of sort of empty time there, which we would be expecting students to work during. So for science, you might have to, again, write up lecture notes or revision, or you might have problem sheets or things like that to work on. And again, this will total at about 40 hours a week. Now you'll notice that I've sort of put this into the nice neat format of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, but that isn't always the case. You can really decide when you want to work and when works best for you. Outside of this, there are lots of other things that students can get involved in as well. It's not all work, and all universities have lots and lots of clubs and societies that you can join, which are a great way to meet new people, and they're normally quite discounted as well. In addition to this, there's always lots of other things going on, both in the university and in the city itself. So sports clubs or events or things like that. And another question I get a lot is of what qualification do you get when you go to university? So this can vary a bit, but in general, if you pass your first degree, which is often your undergraduate degree, then you're likely to be awarded a bachelor's degree. And this could be a bachelor's of arts if you're doing an arts degree, so that's something like history or English, etc., or a bachelor's of sciences if you're doing something like biology. And this normally takes 3 years, and undergraduate degrees, so bachelor's degrees, are often a nice combination of teaching and independent study. I should say now is that sometimes you can get slightly different qualifications, but it does depend on the course. So it's always worth just looking into that later down the line when you're thinking about universities. If you've enjoyed your undergraduate degree and you want to do further study, then you can go on and do a master's degree, which is normally 1 extra year on top of your undergraduate. And it's normally a little bit more focused than your undergraduate was. So let's say, for example, if you did English for your undergraduate degree, then you would normally do a particular part of English for your master's degree. Master's degrees are normally more research-based as well than taught. And if you've enjoyed that too, then you can go on and do a PhD, which is a doctorate. And these normally take about 3 to 4 more years. And these are primarily research-based because at this point, you really are an expert in your chosen area. And again, PhDs are generally more specific than your masters. So you might spend that time investigating a particular question or a particular part of the area you are interested in. It's worth saying at this point now that if you've done your undergraduate degree at one university, you don't have to do your master's at the same university, and you can move around a bit too. Also, universities offer different courses, so this is another reason why you might want to move around a bit. Okay, now the last question we're going to sort of quickly address on university as a whole is, how do I pay for university? And this is something else that comes up all the time. So the main thing I really want to emphasize is that if you would like to go to university, then there are things in place to help you afford that. So I'm sort of just going to give you quite a brief explanation of the student loan system that works in the UK. And I just want to say now that this is how it works for your first degree, so for your undergraduate degree, because it can work a little bit differently for your master's degree, and it does work differently again if you're doing a PhD. So that is worth considering. Okay, so let's start with the tuition fee loan. So UK universities can charge up to £9,250 a year at the moment for your tuition fees. And tuition fees basically cover things like the buildings, the facilities, so that could be like the libraries or the labs, and it could also cover the cost of teaching you. So that's things like your tutorials, your lectures and seminars and things like that. So you can get a tuition fee loan from the student finance company that will cover this. So the way you get these tuition fee loans is that you apply through the student finance company, and then you apply in year 13, and then the student finance company will pay the tuition fee directly to the university. It doesn't go into your bank account, it just goes straight between the two. Everyone, regardless of their circumstance, is entitled to the same coverage when it comes to tuition fee loans. Now, the other loan that students can apply for is called the maintenance loan, and this one works a little bit differently. The maintenance loan is designed to cover your living costs. So that could be things like your accommodation or your food, maybe cost of books, and maybe your travel costs. Now, this one varies a little bit. So basically, there is a minimum amount that every student is entitled to. But after that, it's dependent on your household income. Now, household income is basically how much the people you live with are earning and how much money is coming into the house. And it sort of operates on a sliding scale. So the higher that your household income is, the less you're likely to be entitled to from the maintenance loan, and vice versa. The maintenance loan is paid directly into your bank account as a student, so you're the one in control of how you spend it. So you may have to think about that a bit or budget it a bit. And you do also get a little text for it's about to arrive. It's quite exciting. I'm not going to give you specific amounts of this just because this does change quite a lot. So if you'd like more information on this, I do really recommend that you just check the student finance website out. The UCAS website is also a really great place to start if you're having any questions about university at all. Okay, so in terms of paying them back, you will notice that these are loans, so you do normally have to pay them back at least a bit. But the most important thing to know about student finance loans is that the repayments are based on what you earn rather than what you owe. So what this means in practice is that you only start paying your student finance loan back when you are earning above a certain threshold. And as of today, March 10th, 2021, that threshold is £26,575 a year. Be careful though, that amount does change every year. So by the time you're thinking of applying, it's likely to have changed. So when you're earning above that amount, that's when you'll start to pay a small amount of your salary back to the student finance company. And if you ever drop below that amount, then you'll stop repaying it. The repayment comes out of your wages when you're earning, so it should be done automatically. And when you get your paycheck at the end of the month, you'll see the amount you've paid in tax and national insurance, which covers things like your pension and the NHS and stuff like that. And you'll also see how much you're paying back in your student loans. And it really is a very, very small fraction of your overall paycheck, which hopefully my sort of student finance pie chart illustrates quite well. At the moment, and again, this is true at the moment, that the remaining debt is written off 30 years from when you graduate. It's also worth saying that on top of the student loans, lots and lots of universities do have additional sources of support available for students, which often comes in the form of bursaries or grants or scholarships. And the thing to know about bursaries and grants and scholarships and things like that is that these are quite different from loans because you normally don't have to pay them back. So it's just important to know that if you do want to go to university and this is something you think you want to pursue, then there is lots of support available that will help you cover the costs. And if you want more information, I'd really recommend you check the individual websites of the universities you think you might like to apply to, as well as I mentioned, the student finance website and the UCAS website. Okay, so that sort of brings a section dedicated to general university to an end. And now I'm going to focus particularly on Cambridge. But whenever you talk about Cambridge, the word Oxbridge always comes up. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page and we all understood what Oxbridge means. So Oxbridge is the collective term that is used to refer to the University of Oxford and the University of Cambridge, which are two of the world's oldest and most respected universities. So Oxford was founded in 1096 and Cambridge is a little bit younger and was founded in 1209. Now, there are lots of similarities between these two universities, which is often why they are sort of put together. So for example, from the pictures, you'll be able to see that they look quite similar. So the top there is the University of Cambridge. That's King's College, Cambridge, which is quite a famous college. And on the bottom there, that's Oxford. So that's the Radcliffe Camera in Oxford, which is the history faculty library. And I think next to that is All Souls College. There are lots of other similarities too. So both universities have sort of shorter teaching terms and we have similar ways of teaching, which I've already gone through. So that's the supervision and tutorial system. And we're both collegiate universities, which we'll talk about a little bit later. However, once you get past these sorts of immediate similarities, there are actually quite a lot of differences when you get into the roots of the universities. So it's important to note that just because something is true at one university doesn't mean that it's true at the other. And finally, when it comes to Oxbridge, you can only apply to one of either Oxford or Cambridge. You can't apply to both. However, as I've mentioned, these two universities are quite different. So this decision is often made for you in terms of course choice and things like that. But when we talk about Cambridge, let's just take a minute to acknowledge the elephant in the room that always comes up. And let's just sort of pull apart some of the myths and the misconceptions that are around and can put students off even considering applying to Cambridge, even when they could make a really strong application. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of these now. And these are myths that I've certainly heard a lot. And a lot of them I did believe when I was thinking of applying to university a fair few years ago. Okay, so let's start with number one, which is the idea that Cambridge is just for private school students. This is something that a lot of people seem to think. There seems to be this idea that if you go to Cambridge, you'll be sort of only one of a couple of people who didn't go to these really sort of rich schools or expensive schools that are very like posh and competitive. And this really isn't the case. So most students who attend Cambridge went to very normal state schools. 70% of our freshers, that's our first year students who started last October, went to those kind of schools. And this is true across the university, across all of the colleges, and it's only going up every single year. So please don't be put off by this. Something else that comes up quite a lot is that people seem to be very concerned about expenses. And people seem to have this idea that Cambridge is more expensive than other universities, or it's too expensive for them. Again, this isn't really the case. We do work in the same way as other universities. So you can apply for tuition loans and maintenance loans in the same ways you can for other universities, as I've just gone through. Lots of things at the university are subsidized, which means that you pay less for them as a student than I would as someone who is no longer a student. And there are also lots of bursaries and grants and support available for students when they arrive at the university too. And if you want more information on that, I'd always just recommend looking at the websites. And finally, let's talk about the myth that Cambridge students do nothing but study. Again, this comes up quite a lot, and I have had quite a lot of people say that they're not even thinking about going to Cambridge because they want that sort of authentic university experience. But this really, isn't the case. that Cambridge students are students at the end of the day. There's lots and lots going on, just like at other universities. So lots of concerts and events and parties. We've got a cinema. Normally, Cambridge has a decent live music scene and a stand-up comedy scene, depending on what you like. So there really is lots going on. There are over 800 different student societies that you can get involved in at Cambridge, and over 80 different sports clubs. So you'll certainly be able to find something that fits you, that you really enjoy doing, and there really is a vibrant student life population. So I hope the idea of sort of being like tucked away in the library the entire time isn't going to put you off applying, because it's just not true. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the collegiate system. And this is something quite specific to Oxford and Cambridge, and it is a little bit confusing. So don't worry if you don't immediately understand it. It does take a little bit of time to click into place. Okay, so Cambridge is a collegiate university. And what that means is that the university itself is comprised of colleges. So there are 31 colleges that make up the University of Cambridge. And it's also comprised of university departments. So that's like the Department of History or the Department of Anthropology or anything like that. And university facilities. So that's things like your labs and your libraries. But what is a college? So a college is basically a mini campus. It is a physical space, and it is where students live, eat, and socialize. Colleges admit students. So when you apply to the University of Cambridge, you apply to a particular college, and that college then processes your application and will often invite you to interview. Colleges also provide pastoral and academic support. So if you have any problems, from anything from welfare to finances to your course to anything academic, then your first point of call should always be your college. And colleges also organize supervisions, which are those small group teaching sessions I talked about earlier. All colleges have certain facilities. So regardless of whatever college you attend, your college will have accommodation, it'll have a hall, it will have a common room, it'll have a bar, it'll have a chapel, it'll have a library. After that, some college facilities can be a little bit different depending on when the college was built and where it is. Now, the department is different from this. The department sets the course content, so regardless of whatever college you attend, you'll be learning the same course. Departments also organize lectures, so you will leave your college for some of your teaching. You'll leave for lectures, and if you're a scientist, you'll also leave for practicals and labs. And the department also sets and marks your exams. So again, regardless of whatever college you attend, you'll be sitting the same exams marked to the same standard as everyone else on your course. The university then awards degrees. So regardless of whatever college you attend, you will get a degree from the University of Cambridge. And the University of Cambridge is the collective term for this whole system. So let's just take a look to think about this in practice. So let's just say that you are a mathematician at Magdalene College, which is the college that I work at. So when you apply to the university, you will have applied directly to Magdalene College, and the Magdalene College will then have processed your application and will have invited you to interview, and then it will have offered you a place. You will, as a student, you will now live, eat, and do a lot of your socializing in Magdalene College with your fellow Magdalene students. It's worth saying that Magdalene students won't just be doing maths or just your subject. They'll be doing lots of other subjects. So you'll be living on the same floor as people doing natural sciences or history or human, social, and political sciences, which is another Cambridge course. You'll have some teaching in Magdalene, which is those small group supervision sessions. But for lots of your other teaching, you'll leave Magdalene and go to the maths department. You'll also leave the college to attend your exams. And when you graduate, you'll graduate with a degree from the University of Cambridge. Okay, and this is just another way of visualizing it, because I do find the system is a bit hard to sort of piece together if you're not really immersed in it and living in it. So this is sort of a picture of the centre of Cambridge, which really is sort of a hodgepodge of colleges, of departments or faculties, they both mean the same thing, and town amenities. And hopefully this will illustrate what I mean by colleges being very physical spaces. And often the sort of physical boundaries of the college are very well defined. So let's take King's College, for example, which is quite a famous college at Cambridge. It's where Carols from King's, is filmed every year if your parents watch that. So students at King's will live there, they'll eat there, they'll do a lot of their socializing there, but they will leave King's to, explore Cambridge, to attend certain things, so lectures and stuff. And you occasionally can go into other colleges too. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, there are 31 different colleges that make up the University of Cambridge, and 29 of those are open to undergraduate students. So that's students just like you who will be doing your first degree. 2 of the colleges are just for graduate students, so students who already have a degree and are doing more research. Now, colleges really do come in all shapes and sizes, as I hope this slide illustrates. So regardless of sort of what you feel comfortable in, you'll certainly find a college that feels like home and that you feel like you could really live in and thrive in. But how do you choose a college? I would say overall, try not to get too worried about picking a college because overall colleges really are more similar than they are different. If you ask any Cambridge student, regardless of their college, they will all say that their college is the best. And it's important to note that colleges make absolutely no difference to the standard of teaching that you will receive. And that really is the most important thing because you are applying to study that course. I get asked all the time, what's the best college for law or what's the best college for engineering? And the answer is because so much teaching happens outside of the college environment that no one college is better for any particular subject. Your college also will impact your chances of getting in. We've been doing admissions like this for quite a long time, so we do have procedures in place to make sure that you're not disadvantaged by your college choice. Some colleges are more competitive to get into, but there are one of those things in place is that you can actually get an offer from a college you didn't apply to. So while you might have a hard time getting into that particular college, it won't disadvantage your chances of getting into the university as a whole. However, there might be a few things that you do want to consider. I've just listed a few here. So for starters, not every college does every course. So always just double check the college does the course you're interested in doing. And sometimes colleges will have slightly different requirements on entry. So for your A-levels you have, or combination of A-levels. And they also might have slightly different requirements for admissions assessments or things like that. Best place to check, always the website. You might want to consider the size of the college. So are you interested in being quite a small college, or would you rather be in something that's very big and grand and has lots of land? Similarly, you might want to think about how many students you'd sort of feel best having in your year. So at my college, Magdalene College, we admit about 100 students a year, which means that you really do get to know everyone really well, and you do get that sense of community. But some other colleges admit a lot more. So Trinity College, for example, admits anything from 200 to 250 students a year, which you might prefer because you might not like the idea of knowing everyone super well, or you might like the idea of, feeling part of something much bigger. You might want to think about the location of your college. So some colleges in the center of town, some colleges are a little bit further out, some colleges are closer to certain facilities or departments. It's worth saying, however, that Cambridge itself is actually quite a small city. So even if you're in a college a little bit further out, it's still really not that far. So I have mentioned that all colleges will have certain facilities, but after those, there are some colleges that will have slightly different ones, which you might want to look into. So Girton College, for example, has an indoor swimming pool, which is fully heated, and Churchill College has sort of lots of on-site sports grounds. So if you're particularly interested in either of those things, that is worth thinking about. And finally, you might be interested to know that there are some colleges that only admit students who identify as female. So if you're interested in that, maybe just look up those. Finally, you can make an open application. And what that means is that you're applying sort of directly to the university and then you are just allocated a college. This doesn't actually make any difference to your application at all. The college you are allocated will simply just progress your application as if you had applied directly to them. Okay, so now let's jump in to applying to Cambridge. But before we go for that, let's start with thinking about what happens when you apply to university. So you apply to university in year 13 through UCAS, which is the online portal through which you apply to university. It's got loads of information on, as I've already said. And it's also often how universities will communicate their decisions back to you. You can apply for up to 5 different courses, but there are some which you can only apply to 4 at. So for example, if you're thinking of applying to medicine, you can only apply to 4 medical courses, and then you'll have another option for something else. When you submit your UCAS form, you'll be required to put in certain information. So you'll be asked to put in your GCSE grades, your predicted A-levels, your personal statement, which is basically an essay on you and why you want to study that subject. And you'll also be asked to include a teacher's reference. So this is the application process for Cambridge. I'm just going to say now, this is similar to the Oxford process, but it's not identical. So again, just because it's true for Cambridge does not mean it's true for Oxford. We've already covered 1 and 2, which is that you choose your course and then you choose your college. So let's jump straight into number 3, which is checking admission assessment or test registration deadlines. Different courses at different colleges will require different tests or admissions assessments. So always just make sure that you're organized with those test registration deadlines, and all the information will always be on the website. And this can change year on year. So next, you have to submit your UCAS application. You apply to Cambridge the same way that you apply to most of the universities, which is through UCAS. But the only difference really is for Cambridge is that the deadline is earlier. So for most universities, you have to apply by January. But for Oxford and Cambridge, the deadline is 6 p.m. on the 15th of October. Now, this is the deadline for when your application needs to be completely submitted, including your teacher's reference. So sometimes schools will have slightly earlier deadlines so that the teachers have time to pull together a reference. I would really recommend you not miss this deadline. It will severely impact your application if you do miss it. It's also worth saying as well that when you apply to university, you are applying to all of the universities you want to apply to in one go. So you can't apply to Cambridge in October and then apply to your other 4 in January. Instead, when you click submit on your form, it will go to all of the universities that you have selected in one go, but they won't know where else you've applied. So we'll get your application, but we don't know if you've applied to which other 4 or 5 universities you've applied to. Sorry, 3 or 4 universities, I should say. So if you are then applying to Cambridge, and this is true only for Cambridge, you will then be sent a URL asking you to submit an additional questionnaire. And this is nothing to worry about. It's just so we can get a little bit more information about you that we can't get from the UCAS form. Once you've submitted the additional questionnaire, you'll then have to either submit written work and or take an admissions assessment. Again, this does vary depending on your course and on your college, so it's always best to just keep an eye on the website. When we talk about written work, we are asking for a piece of work you have done as part of your A-level teaching. So it's not about submitting, doing all this extra work or writing another essay or anything like that. It's just something that you've done as part of your teaching that has been marked by your teacher. And if you have any more questions on what sort of stuff you should submit, then again, best to check with the colleges. Admissions assessments, as I've already said, can vary by course and college. So this answer is coming up a lot now, but best to check with the individual colleges. They normally have sort of past papers available for you to look at. Or if it's a faculty test, the faculty will have certain, examples that you can look at and maybe some information on marking criteria. Once you've submitted your written work and or taken your admissions assessment, it's then a little bit of a waiting game while we process all the applications that have been submitted to us. We will then select candidates who we would like to interview, and about 75% of students who apply to the University of Cambridge are offered an interview. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on the interview right now because it is such a long way off, but really, I hope you don't worry about it too much. It's not as scary as it can seem. It's not at all about making you feel small or making you feel stupid, and you may be asked questions that you don't know the answer to, and that is completely normal. It's all about just sort of seeing how you think and how you can work through a problem and how you can apply knowledge that you already have to a new situation. Normally, you'll have 2 or 3 interviews, which could last anything from 20 to 45 minutes. Don't worry too much if you're on either end of that or outside of it, because that actually might not be a reflection on you. It might just be how the interviewer prefers to interview. Normally, you'll be interviewed by 2 academics in each session. Once you've interviewed, it's another bit of a waiting game, but hopefully a little bit more pleasant this time because you've had Christmas in between, while we look at all the applicants and make final decisions. Final decisions for Cambridge are released in January. Mid-January normally. Oxford normally releases it a little bit earlier, but still in January. And regardless of whatever college you attend, you will find out the result of your application on the same day. So normally, you'll sort of get 1 of 2 different decisions. So you might be told that unfortunately, due to the sort of standard of applications we had that year, that you have been unsuccessful in your application. I really hope that the fear of having an unsuccessful application doesn't put you off applying. The only way to absolutely ensure that you won't be offered a place is to not apply. So it's always worth doing. Or you might be told that you have been successful in your application and you're being offered a place. If so, it's likely you'll be given what's called a conditional offer. So that place is conditional upon you meeting certain A-level requirements, which we'll talk a little bit about in a minute. Okay, so as you can see from this, there are a fair few steps to applying to university, and particularly applying to Cambridge. Some of this is specific to Cambridge, so the additional questionnaire is, and more of our courses and other universities do require written work or admissions assessments or the interview, but not everything on here is not just unique to Cambridge. Other universities will sometimes have slightly different requirements for applying, so it's always worth just double checking on the websites. So we have all this information on our applicants, but what is it that we're looking for? The first thing that we're looking for, and the main thing, is we're looking for students who we think are a good fit for their chosen course. Now, the problem with this is that every course is different. So it's difficult for me to give you sort of, things that you can definitely do to guarantee you a place. There really is no magic dart, and every application is considered individually. That being said, there are sort of certain things that we can say across applicants that we do look for. The first one is that we're looking for academic potential, not polish. So we're not asking you to turn up with an encyclopedic knowledge of your subject. It's more about having that sort of curiosity and that intrigue that we can sort of see and we think will help you really thrive at Cambridge. That being said, applicants to Cambridge do have a strong academic record, so do study hard for your exams. All successful applicants to Cambridge are hardworking and motivated. That one doesn't need much explanation, but they do have that sort of focus and determination that we think will help them, thrive in what can be a challenging academic environment, and they're able to learn independently. And finally, all successful applicants to Cambridge are genuinely really interested in and really excited about their subject. And anything you can do to sort of show that, so to engage with your subject, is a real plus. And these are the typical offers that we give out. So there is no fixed offer for your GCSEs, but that being said, generally applicants have done quite well. So most students will have at least 4 or 5 level 7, 8s or 9s at GCSE. That being said, there are exceptions and there is no minimum requirement. If we wanted certain GCSE grades, we'd ask for them. And some people do perform a lot better at A-level than they do at GCSE. When it comes to A-levels, at Cambridge, we normally offer between an A star and an AA for the humanities to 2 A stars and an A in the sciences. But as I just said, every application is considered individually and your offer might be slightly different from this. It might be slightly higher, it might be slightly lower. You might have certain grades linked to certain A levels and things like that. But it is worth knowing that this is often on minimum offer. Often students who are successful in their application and do go on to attend the university have exceeded these grade requirements. So as I said at the beginning, it might seem like an awfully long way off, all this stuff. And you might think, why am I thinking about this now? But the answer is it's a really good idea to think about this now, because pretty soon you're going to have to make some decisions that might impact what you can study at university. And the main one of these is going to be your A levels. Now, a lot of courses will have preferences on certain A levels or combinations of A levels when you apply. And these are there for a reason. It's really just to make sure that you have the basis of knowledge and you have the skills to be able to thrive on the course. So it's really important that you're making an informed decision about what A levels you want to study. I would really recommend, if you haven't seen it yet, to look at this little guide called the Subject Matters, which the university has put together, which sort of goes through the different choices you'll be making. So if you know exactly what degree you want to do at the end of the day, then that's great. I'd really recommend you just look at the different university websites and look at the A levels that you might be required to take and then pick those. If you don't know what you want to do, that's totally fine. Loads of people don't. I didn't know until quite late. So what I would really recommend you start to think about instead is whether you might want to study something in the arts, so an essay-based subject, or if you might want to study something in the sciences. And I'm just going to quickly run through some combinations of A levels that might sort of suit those different paths. So let's start. So if you're interested in studying something along this route, then these combinations can be quite helpful. So for starters, doing biology and chemistry is a really nice combination and they do really complement each other. And students who do this could go on to consider something in the medical or the biomedical sciences, veterinary medicine, or good old-fashioned biology and things like that. Chemistry works really well with maths, and it also really works really well with physics, or with both maths and physics. And students who do this could consider going on to something based in chemistry, so things like biochemistry or chemical engineering. And finally, maths and physics also work really well together. If you are thinking of doing this, you might want to also consider taking further maths. And if you're thinking you might want to apply to something like maths, but your school doesn't offer further maths, then it might be worth just contacting the university to ask if there's anything else you can be doing. And students who study this could go on to do something like maths, physics, engineering, but it also work really well for computer science. But let's say that all you know is that you really want to study the arts and you don't want to study the sciences at all. And that's fine. So here's just some combination of things that you might be interested in, that you might want to look at doing to give you a good footing for arts or social sciences courses, which again are things like history or English or philosophy or sociology or anything like that. So the first thing I'd recommend you think about is taking what's called an essay-based subject. It doesn't have to actually be in the course you're thinking of pursuing, unless you're thinking of doing something like English, then I'd recommend taking English A-level. But if you don't know what you want to do, an essay-based subject is useful for lots and lots of different courses. This is because courses ask specific A-levels, not just for having that knowledge in the subject, but also to check that you have the skills. And essay-based subjects can apply to lots and lots of different courses. So that could be something like English or history, philosophy, politics, classical civilization. There's lots of different essay-based subjects, so do look around at what interests you. Next, you might want to consider taking a language. And languages are really useful, not just for students who want to study something like French or German at university, but they're also good for lots of different courses, because when you're learning a language, you're developing lots of particular skills which are really transferable. So for example, you're learning how to pick up things quickly, you're learning to develop and notice patterns, to apply things you know to a new context. And this is really useful for languages, obviously, and also for courses that have a language element. So things like classics or theology sometimes has a language element too. But it can also be really useful if you're considering going down the path of coding or something similar. And finally, if you're thinking more towards a social sciences, so perhaps sociology or something like that, you might want to consider taking maths or further maths, or maths and further maths, I should say. Okay, so maybe you have absolutely no idea what it is that you want to study. Maybe you're really interested in studying biology, but you're also really interested in studying English. And that's totally fine. There are lots of people like that. So you might be wanting to try and find ways that will keep your options open. And this is something students get told all the time. But it's important to know that choosing options that genuinely do keep your options open can actually be quite difficult. Every year, we encounter lots of students who've taken a really broad range of A-levels, hoping it would keep them available for lots of different courses. But when this comes to Cambridge in particular, this can make candidates less competitive, particularly in relation to the sciences. That being said, there are certain A-levels that are required for lots of different Cambridge courses, so you might consider taking a couple of these. And I've put these in the yellow box on the side there. So that's things like languages, and essay-based subjects such as history is always quite useful and transferable. And then certain sciences such as maths, physics, or chemistry will give you a good grounding in lots of different subjects. Now, as we've already seen, typical offers from Cambridge are based on students taking 3 A-levels or equivalents, and you won't normally be at an advantage by taking 4. That being said, many of our science applicants do have further maths. So if your school doesn't offer further maths, it might be worth just emailing the college you're thinking of applying to ask if there's anything you can do to develop your skills and understanding. And finally, you should know that often general studies is not included in the offer. So if you're doing 3 A-levels, including general studies, I'd maybe recommend taking a 4th A-level at that point. And finally, something else that you can be doing now, which would be really helpful for both yourself and for yourself now when you're thinking about courses, but also later down the line when you're applying to university, is starting to engage with your subjects outside of the classroom. And we call this supercurricular activities. So supercurricular activities, anything you can do that is relevant to your chosen course and that you're not doing as part of your regular teaching. And these are a really great way for you to figure out what it is that you're interested in and what it is that you want to study. And it's also a great way for you to rule out things you definitely don't want to study. If you start doing it and you think, wow, this is really boring, this is my worst nightmare, I can't do this anymore. That's fine. It's also really useful because it will help you develop the skills that you'll need at university. So it'll help you develop your independent study skills, it'll help you develop your time management skills, and things like that. It's also really useful for us because it shows us that you have like genuine interest in your subject that I talked about earlier. And it also shows us that you have those skills that will help you thrive at university. So again, independent study skills, time management, etc., but also the motivation to do this outside of your teaching. Now, there's nothing that you have to do or have to read or have to watch or anything like that. It's all about just finding what you're interested in and then fully tumbling down that rabbit hole as best you can. I've put some ideas on the slide now of things that you might want to consider to start engaging with, but it's really all about just finding what works best for you. This could be watching films or listening to podcasts or doing online courses or reading articles or doing some work experience or just doing further reading. It's all fine. The list just goes on and on. If you are thinking about doing some further reading, I would really recommend using your local libraries. People seem to forget about these, but they're a really, really great resource. And if you know what if you've got an idea of what subject you might want to do, your teachers will certainly be happy to give you some pointers if they did, especially if they did that subject. I've included work experience on here, but obviously at the moment, this is a little bit more difficult than normal because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you want further information on that, I'd really recommend checking the particular course you're thinking of applying to. And that is everything from me. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions whatsoever, then please feel free to email me. My email is on the board right now, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. I also have a Twitter account, which is where I put information on events that I'm running or anything else that's going on across the university too. So it's a good place to sort of keep an eye out for lots of different things. And yeah, thanks so much.